we've got a couple of segments left. Paul Guttridge is going to speak now about private health insurance, which is a question we get very regularly. Paul has joined the office in the last 12 months as a certified financial planner and accountant. Very, very good planner and a friend of mine for many, many years. So please welcome Paul Guttridge.
We'll be close. We'll be close. So by the looks of it. All right, thanks guys. Thanks for that, David. That was a great presentation. Now I know what my plan is for the White Curl Grub, which is feeding it to the magpies. Been an arch enemy for a long time now in my garden, so yeah, now I know what to do. Dig them up and get my little girl to put them in a bucket and feed it to the magpies or any other birds around. So that's great. Thanks, David. That was very entertaining. And it looks like we had some great responses and some great activity. So that was well received. Thank you. All right, so private health. Before I get started as well, yeah, the rain is absolutely teeming out there. I just want to say thanks to everyone for coming out today, because that was, massive effort coming out. I had a couple of my clients actually ring up and say, oh, a bit scared to drive out here, so they didn't come along, which is a bit of a shame. So massive effort. Thank you guys. Thanks for coming out. Private health. As Jill said, it's one of the questions we get asked quite a bit, and it's one of those insurances that we generally don't give too much advice on, but it's a very important topic, and we get asked it all the time. So can I just have a show of hands on how many people have actually got private health? Yep, so quite a few of us. Excellent. Good to see. Let's just look at the private health industry. So we all feel we pay a fair bit for our private health premiums, which we do. But when I did a bit of research with APRA, I had a look at some of the numbers, and it's actually not a very profitable industry. It's only making about $600 million, which is not big considering 53% of the population has health insurance. And that's mainly contained, Uber and Medicare Private hold 50% of that market. So yes, it's not a very profitable business. And you've got to remember, back many years, most of them were not-for-profit businesses, and now some people are trying to make money out of it. So yeah, very interesting. So often we get asked, well, why don't we got a very good Medicare system in Australia. I don't know if you realise that, and you probably hear a lot of talk about the American system. Our Medicare is a very good system. So often we get, well, I'll just go through Medicare. So I'll talk about a few things about the pros and cons with Medicare versus the private health. But things to consider, one of the things that, I never really knew this until I did a little bit of research in this presentation, and about ambulance. I don't know if you've heard many stories or you've had an ambulance and then all of a sudden you get hit with a bill at the end of the day. And quite often people are surprised how much that is. Now, there's a lot of states that actually cover ambulance in full. New South Wales is one of those states that doesn't. But it covers about 49% of the cost. But a typical ambulance call out is nearly $400. Plus they've got kilometre rate there. So that's why it can rack up quite a bit if you're a fair way from the hospital. So if they come out and they just attend to you and they just treat you down here, well, you're basically paying $400. I mean, still $400 is $400. So that's a good positive about private health. And Medicare obviously doesn't cover that. One of the things to think about is when you go to a hospital for elective surgeries and things like that, is ask the questions. Just because you have private health doesn't mean you have to use it. And quite often, going through procedures, it's sometimes better to actually go through the Medicare system as opposed to using your private health. And part of that reason is because there might be a bit of a gap or an excess you've got to pay by using your private health. And sometimes if it works out using Medicare, let's use Medicare. A few other things to think about with private health. It enables you to claim money back, whereas non-Medicare things, and that's more about the extras, like your physios and your chiros and those sorts of things. Dentists, not covered by Medicare, which people are quite surprised by. So, and there are a few public dental clinics, but very few and far between. Private hospital rooms, in terms of having private health, one of the big things for me and probably my family is private hospital rooms. We've all been to a public hospital. We've all probably stayed in a public room, and there's cattle classes, as Christine likes to call it, where you're staying with 3 other people and you just struggle to sleep and those sorts of things. I struggle to sleep sometimes with my wife just snoring. Never mind, I'm fit, healthy, I'm not trying to recover from anything, but trying. I get someone pointing at their wife there, thank you. It's not just me. My wife is a little bit unhappy about me saying this, but so you think about it in a private hospital, you've got to recover, you're in there for a week. That's a big one for me. I don't know about anybody else, but that's certainly a big one for me. Your preferred doctor, obviously, if you go through the Medicare system, it's whatever doctor's there and whatever doctor you get. Okay, which private doctor you get that, often you get through the preferred doctor. Waiting periods for pre-existing conditions on extras and things like that. This is the other big one, I think, is waiting times. So generally my first response is when a client says, well, should I have private health, is the waiting times. Some of these numbers are a bit old, but the average New South Wales waiting time is 56 days going through Medicare, which, okay, that's not too bad. But then, a typical one, especially for our clients, is hips and knees. Nearly every second client I've got has been through a knee replacement. And then you're looking at 209 days. And I was talking to Gil, and his father-in-law had a knee replacement, and for him it was 12 months waiting period. So I just wonder about some of these times. Other thing to think about is COVID. We've just had COVID, and if you'll recall, elective surgery got cancelled for most people. So imagine what those numbers are going to look like in a year or two time. Obviously having private health cover, it's generally shorter waiting periods because it's your specialist. You go see the specialist. It's when they've got availability, which is usually only a month or two. Also, it suits when you need to go do the surgery as well. So you're making more choice. You've got more options. You've got more control over when you receive health. Things to think about is pain. How long can you put up for that pain? I think Gil was talking to me about his father-in-law again, about his hip surgery, and he was just in pain, kept on putting off, I'll be right. Then didn't have private health, went through Medicare, and then all of a sudden he's got to wait another 12 months because that's a waiting period. He actually, I think, Gil, I can't remember what was the health fund. He went and signed up for a health fund and got some private cover, and then next thing you know, he's getting his surgery in 2 months' time.
Yeah, you need to look at all the different ones. In this case, it was teachers' health. Teachers' health. Yeah, but and we have people on walking frames here. And once it goes, if it's an option, you want to take it.
Yeah, definitely. I won't talk about that too much because I think time's running out of me quickly. David's waited for a long time, so that shortened up my session. Government rebate, so everyone gets some sort of rebate on their premiums if you've had it for a while. It depends on your income and those sorts of things. Medicare surcharge is not really relevant for a lot of people in here because it's about how much income you earn. If you haven't, for those people that didn't put their hand up and haven't had private health, generally there's a 2% extra premium on your standard premiums for people that haven't built a private health. So is it for you? And like I said, this is the question we get all the time. Think about your family history. Think about your current health now, how you're feeling, whether you should have that, and think about the waiting times. How long can you put up with the pain that you're going through now? So think about those. But yeah, it's all family history. You know, if it's a common thing, you've got knee replacements in your family or hip replacements, it's something you should be seriously thinking about. One of the other, we had a client that didn't have private health and thought, I'll just save it up in the bank. Whatever the premiums are, $400 a month, I'll just put them up in the bank. Now, I asked all the advisors, and none of us had come across one client that actually puts that money away for the savings for when they potentially have that surgery or whatever it is. So, sure. There you go. Yep. Wow,
The next one is going to be a cost group of 8,500, the last one
there you go.
costs 10.
Tristan, do you want to come up in here and, yeah, that's all right, yeah.
So we have to be in the health fund.
Yep.
The people are to have the insulin pump.
Yeah, did everyone hear that?
No.
Yeah, so insulin pump, which you've got to have replaced every 4 years, and that's costing about 8,500 each time. So you think of the average premiums, average premiums across the country, and this includes younger people and older people, is about 3,600 per annum. Okay, so it's going to take a few years to actually save that up. Thank you for that. All right, I've got quite a few slides here, and I've already had the 5-minute call, so I might have to rush through a few of them. Typical hip replacement, costing between 20,000 and 42,000, and then you've got out-of-pocket expenses on top of that as well. And one of the other things that people forget is okay, you have the surgery and you've got a few out-of-pocket expenses, and then you've got to have rehab. You've got to have private health, physio, you've got to have chiro, or whatever those things you've got to be. Having the extras on top of your private cover will help pay for those sorts of things, okay, rather than have to fork it out. I know I get to the end of the calendar year every time with my extras. I've run out of extra covers on my physio. I've now got to pay full fare, which is always a bit annoying. So that's just a bit of a graph between the ranges between the different costs in each of the. See that hip replacements, knee replacements, ACL repairs, those sorts of things. So that just gives you a bit of an average cost.
It's not very clear.
It's not very clear at all, is it?
Yeah, the next page.
The yellow one is the highest, and obviously the blue one is the lowest, and they're the ranges between the. So you can see it varies quite a bit in terms of how much it costs to have some of these surgeries. I've got a whole list of there. I'm not going to go through each one, but I've got a whole list of costs, average costs for different procedures there in terms of brain, heart. That's from 2015 figures. So if you look at, let's say, a heart transplant, if it's not emergency, which Medicare will cover, but if it's not emergency and you've got to actually book it in, then potentially up for 140 grand on a heart transplant. So that's a big expense you've got to come up with. That's from 2015 figures as well. So that's pretty old. Sorry, what was that?
They make you have one.
Yeah.
It wasn't
Almost, yeah, it would. I've got a few other ones there. The most expensive one we could find was the liver transplant, which is actually fairly common. So yeah, 153,000 for an average liver transplant. So that's quite a bit of money. I don't know if anyone else has got that line about. And that's where private health it might not eliminate the full cost, but at least it can eliminate some of the costs and make a big difference. And that's where I think the advisors can come into it, is you talk to your advisors whether you can afford it. If you're asking yourself that question, talk to the advisors. Talk about, if you look at when we do our capital graphs with most clients, and look at can you afford it. And if it's a simple answer, yes, I can afford it, then for me, and I don't mean to be a bit biased, I'm not trying to sell private health here, but if you can afford it, I would be highly recommending you be looking at it. Rough statistics, if we just look at a bit of an example of a hip replacement, average cost for a hip replacement is about $25,000. And from this journal, Rheumatic Medicine, it's about an 8 to 10% chance that someone over 65 is going to need some sort of hip replacement. It might not seem like a high percentage, but if you think about, that's just a hip replacement. What about all the other procedures that could potentially happen? So, and that's what we think, we believe 50%, there's a 50% chance over 65 you're going to have some sort of major procedure. And of course, if you've got a couple, it's a pretty high chance one of you are going to have a need for some sort of major surgery. Average premiums, like I said, about 3,600. To save up that, it's going to take about 7 years to save up for just a hip replacement. Once again, that's not thinking about any other procedures you've got to have, any other minor surgeries on top of that, any of the ancillary benefits like your physios and chiros and that sort of thing. Any questions? Sir?
shoppers in the silence.
Sorry?
Free shoppers in the silence.
Excellent, that's good, yeah. That's great. Look, most of you have got it, which is great to see. Then you've got to think, are you paying the right policy? Are you in the right product? And that's a very complex decision. There's plenty of websites out there. I looked at Keenstar. Keenstar was a fairly good source, but it still had a bit of bias towards products. The private health one is actually a very good starting place. That's a really good website. It's non-biased. It asks the right questions. You're not handing over your personal information as well. And so that's a very good website for you to go and have a look and see if your policy stacks up with what you should have compared to what's out there. The other thing with the private health, it covers every policy out there in Australia. Okay, whereas some of the others, they don't, because they're biased towards a certain product or a certain cover. So yeah, be very careful with that. Yeah, simple. Yeah, that's the easy solution. Yeah, don't worry about private health. Just don't get sick. Yeah. Which, when you think about it, if you keep healthy, you keep fit, you do lots of walking, if you keep your mind active and those sorts of things, and typical, you're going to live a little bit longer and you're going to be healthier for a lot longer as well. So, quick checklist, which I just got from the ACCC, is there's a bit of a checklist there. So, know your options, know your needs, and that's probably most important, which is about the family history and how your current health is now. Shop around. Don't set and forget. I know I've had my private health for a long, long time, and I don't review it too much because it's too hard, which is the typical response. Look at that website and have a look and look around. So, understand the terms and conditions. There's a lot of policies, you think you're getting something that's going to cover some treatment, but sometimes it doesn't. So, yeah. Any questions? That's pretty much me. Sorry for rushing there, guys.
In talking about that session before, we're trying to, as you know, spreadsheet junkies and figure out the mathematics. And the short answer is there's no right answer. Is it a big mistake to get it? Is it a big mistake not to get it? I tend to land on the side of most people are living longer. The chance of you having something fairly major is pretty real. I'd say well over 50%, certainly as a couple. I don't think it's a disaster to have health insurance. It's a question of whether you can afford it. And that comes down to how much money you have and how much you spend on other things and things like that. So what we're increasingly doing with clients in our reviews is modelling the price of your health insurance to see if it makes sense and see if you can afford to pay it. Only you know whether hip replacements or heart disease run in your family. So what I'm going to talk about now, as I was saying before, Steve Baxter is going to do this, but he sends his apologies. Something came up and prevented him from doing it. We're going to talk about retirement villages. These are over 55 villages and lifestyle villages. It's an increasingly common question we get. What have I done now, Dave?
Nothing. Nothing you said about Steve. I know where he is.
Yeah. He negotiated his way out of this one, is what I'm saying. There might be a girlfriend involved. So I'm going to talk today about retirement villages. These are over 55s, lifestyle versus, leasehold is. So understanding that there are many ways to skin a cat, and I was really happy when I found that picture. But I didn't skin the cat, I just found another skin for a cat. We're not really discussing everything today. What we're discussing is the stuff we see come across our desk most of the time. Understand that there are many, many, many variations on contracts and things like that, and you really need to take this decision very seriously, very slowly, and take it very early, please. Okay, so retirement village. What is a retirement village? Basically, it's an agreement where you get to own or control the land and the building. What it means is that you either buy a freehold, the way you buy a house, or you buy a lease. Right, with a house, you have to pay stamp duty, it's more expensive getting in. With a leasehold, you're paying them a regular payment. The obligation exists to reinstate the building when you leave. Now that could cost between $5,000 and $30,000 when you leave. These numbers get kind of scary and it becomes very, very clear what the better option is. So if this decision is yours, need to take quite carefully. Legally, it's very, very hard to get someone out of a retirement village. Residents typically do pay an exit fee, and it is substantial, up to 30% of the value of the building, well, I think. Village operators can also retain some of the growth in the underlying increase in the value of the building. Now, the lifestyle community is an increasingly popular model, and it makes sense for reasons that we'll show you. They're just not everywhere, and they're not as easy to find. And I really think the government needs to put some work into regulating the sector, because some of these numbers are going to shock you. Buy the building, but rent the land. So basically, it's like a really classic caravan park. Monthly rental fees tend to be a little higher, not a big drama, but you get rent assistance from Centrelink, so you get $50 a fortnight each or $100 a fortnight, which does ameliorate it a little bit. The operator has a right to kick you out. Now that would be a really dumb thing to do if you were a lifestyle village operator, because all of a sudden you've got no business model. But do understand that legally you're not as in strong a position as you are up here. It tends to have very small exit fees relative to the top one. So let's have a bit of a look around. Typically the resident retains all the capital growth in the underlying value of the land, of the villa. Some interesting statistics. Now, this is only last year. There were about 65,000 participating independent living units or retirement units participated in this survey last year. The average residency, 64% women. Which is no great surprise, women live longer than men. It's as simple as that. The average age of the people in the villas, about 81. Now, the average days it takes to sell a retirement village unit, about 260 days. You don't get your money back quickly, typically. It can take up to 3/4 of a year. Now, only 87% of the villas are occupied in Australia at the moment. Now that's not a big problem. They're building a lot more all the time, right? So this is why they're not fully occupied. But also people, stop breathing. So there's new ones coming on the market all the time. The average age that people go into these things is 75. Now in this nation, I think we do a pretty ordinary job about talking about preparing for this phase of life. It tends to just sort of sneak up on people. The families need to talk about it, the professionals need to talk about it, in your peer groups you need to talk about it, which I think increasingly you are, but I see it over and over again, particularly with aged care, when someone has to go into residential care. It often happens in a rush, and that's a dumb way to make a big decision. So we need to be talking about this and thinking about it. So if you're not in that age profile now, at least scout around your area at some point to see what options are out there, even if you don't have to make that decision. It's useful to know. Now, on average, people live 8 to 9 years in a village like this. The normal exit fee for a retirement village is around 30% because they do stay there long enough to do it, and that's quite a substantial number. It's the average fee as a percentage of median house price. Oh yeah, the cost of a retirement village unit is around about 2/3 of the cost of a normal house in that area, which is actually quite a lot given that you don't own much land. They're interesting statistics. So let's have a look at a few things. Ingoing costs. This is known as the entry contribution. I'm putting these phrases up here because this is the language that appears in the contracts, and it can get overwhelming. If you have to pay something to buy the unit, it's an entry cost, a purchase price, an ingoing fee, I don't care what you call it, but it's what it costs, buying price. The average cost of buying into one of these villas is about $463,000. That was last year's figure. More if you live in the big cities, less if you live out of Lightning Ridge. Yes, I went to Lightning Ridge last year. Not surveying, but
Why one?
sorry. Now, it depends on the area you've got, the size of the accommodation. Stamp duty is payable if you're buying ownership or via a strata fee, and you need to know that because that's $10,000 to $20,000 to buy in. There is, and this is a big one, there is no regulation of these costs. The government doesn't stick their nose in like they do with financial planning, banking, aged care. So it's quite unregulated, therefore a little bit riskier that you can get caught I went through a scenario before Christmas with a client that got stuck in one of these villages. They hated it and they couldn't get out. And it was quite sad. Now, ongoing costs, there is a monthly charge. I call it the charge that you pay to the man, because there's always a man that comes and does things. And they maintain their grounds, and they maintain the communal buildings, and they fix things. And it includes often the land and water rates. It also includes for the man to come and replace the light bulb or repair the ceiling or fix paint the wall or whatever. Average fee is about $520 a month, about is that about $140, $130, $140 a week? What is it, John? Oh, yeah, there you go. But it depends on how many units, how many bedrooms you have. It also means under certain conditions, not so much in the retirement villages, but more in the lifestyle villages, you can get rent assistance, if they frame it right. You can get extra services there, which is actually not bad. These ones that include meals, laundry, cleaning, and medical support often dovetail straight into permanent residential care as well. And that's a good thing if you're on your own. Now, outgoing costs, and this is where the devil is. They call it a deferred management fee, which is a load of codswallop. It's an exit fee. It's nasty. It's there, right? And you need to understand it. It's usually a percentage of the entry or sale price, so it's usually a percentage of the entry fee. We're seeing more and more exit price, which means that they're getting a percentage of the money on the way out the door as well. It will vary between villages. It typically is between 5% and 30%, although it can go higher. Options are emerging, such as a smaller ingoing cost and a higher exit cost, or a higher ingoing cost and a smaller exit cost. It's always in the numbers. Someone has to build a spreadsheet for you to understand this stuff, guys. And I'm quite twitchy about it. The exit terms can include a commission, so they can charge you 3% on the way out the door, as well as take a percentage of the sale price. They will often charge you a refurbishment fee if you're in a retirement village as opposed to a lifestyle village. And they can take up to 100% of all the growth in the value of the unit. So if you pay 500 grand to get in, and when you go, someone buys it for 700 grand, they can take the 200 grand on top too. Doesn't mean the contract that you will be offered will have that. You just need to know that legally they can almost do anything they want here. And you've got to get into the detail. It'll take less than 10 minutes, okay? So I'm going to give you four scenarios. Scenario number one. A deferred management fee, read exit fee, right, of 10% in year one, going to 30% over 8 years, which means it's 2.5% extra per year, calculated per year. The village keeps all of the capital gain. There is no exit commission, which they'll make a big deal of because they're actually taking all the profit. And there is no refurbishment fee. Scenario number two. They'll start with a 5% exit fee, jumping to 30% over 6 years. Village keeps all of the capital gain. There is no exit. There is no refurbishment fee, and again, they'll make a big deal out of that, but that's because they're taking all the profit. Now sometimes, and it's really important to stress here, you are buying a lifestyle, you're not buying an investment. You're choosing to look somewhere to live. And if you live in a house with lots of stairs and a lot of grass to mow and you want something simpler and better, that's the choice you're making. It doesn't mean that it's wrong here. I'm just, you all know me well enough, I tend to be blunt. The costs can be so widely varying that I wish people, or the operators and the government would have a stronger requirement here for transparency. It tends to get quite intimidating when you get this big contract in front of you. Scenario number three, again a 5% exit fee, but this time of the sale price. Right? But they get to only keep half of the capital gain on this side. They do charge a commission and they may charge a refurbishment fee. Scenario number four, what you'll call the lifestyle village, the one that I'm softer on, there are no exit fees. They only take you 3% commission to sell the unit for you. Oops. And it's fairly simple. So again, we've got four scenarios now. In this example, you paid $600,000 to go in. You may sell it in 5 or 10 years' time, depending. You may die, or you may go into an aged care village, aged care, residential care. So scenario number 1, 2, 3 and 4. So if we look here, so if you have to exit in year 5, in this instance, you've paid 600,000 to go in, you get 400,000 when you leave. The retirement village gives quite a substantial amount of money on the way out. All the capital gain and that deferred management fee. Scenario number 2, slightly different, but you get the theme here. The lifestyle village, which seems to be the more popular one and the one that's becoming more popular for very obvious reasons. And I don't have the expertise around the Hunter Valley, for example, or the Central Coast to know which one is X and which one is Y. The point I'm trying to make is you need to read the contracts very carefully and know what you're buying into. Okay. Now, if you go after 10 years, which to be honest is probably a more likely scenario, 5 years would be a fairly short tenure there. Again, less money coming back to the family, but quite a substantial difference between what they retain. Now, it's built into their business model. And it's not illegal, it's not wrong, and I have no idea how much it costs to run these villages, so I'm not actually going to judge it. My point of view of this is most people don't really have a gut instinct about the number or how hard it is to get out of it. So this is the whole comment here at the end, that the devil is in the detail regardless of how cute the devil looks, how nice the village looks, how much you want to be there. It's really, really important. It's a complex area. You need to talk to lawyers and financial planners to do the numbers, to understand it. And my advice to you is to talk to them early. So before you have to make a decision, make the decision so that you know what you're looking for. When you do it when it's a good idea as opposed to when it's a necessity, you find yourself more comfortable with the decisions you're making. There's a strong chance you'll get back less than what you paid to go in. And I have no idea why I got that wrong. Nothing in this world is so expensive as cheap advice. So I'm not a big fan of trusting Johnny down at the pub or Mary at Bowls. By all means, listen and gather information. But go and talk to someone like Vicky, who I know has a bit of expertise in this area, or perhaps someone like us who know how to do the numbers fairly well in your case, taking into account, because I'm not going to try and make it more complex, spend a little bit more on the retirement village, you get a little bit more age pension in certain situations. So there is an equation here which requires a bit of thinking. My whole point is it's a minefield. It can be a great outcome, it can be an ordinary outcome, it can be a very difficult outcome, and I would ask that you think about it early. All right? Yeah, that's not a really positive story. So right now I'm going to do a positive session to finish on that China. Does anyone have any questions? Nope. Okay. Thank you very much. We'll just switch over.
Because he loves it so much, we're going to let Bill back up on the stage one more time for this session. Yeah, sorry about that. Now, for those who follow our webinar series, you'll see we like to finish off with a Gill's Insight section where we go through a few current and relevant topics that we're seeing out there on the news. And one of Gill's favourites and one of our favourites around the office is what's happening with China and its relationship with the USA and Australia. You've seen a lot of news, there's a lot of tension, there's a lot going on. So we thought we'd finish off with Gill's Insight on China versus Australia and the US. So Gil, to kick off, why don't we start with a bit of backstory? China was a closed-off nation. Now it's a world power. How do we get to this point?
Okay, thank you, Ryan. The story of China is fascinating. At the moment, it's very, very easy to look at China and think of them as a bully and that Australia was an innocent victim. It ain't quite true. Right? There's a lot going into the backstory here, which is interesting. You've heard me, if any of you listen to the webinars, I'm pretty pro-Australia in so many ways. Pro our future, but also where we are in the world. China used to be a very closed kingdom. It was a country that there's some argument about whether they tried to conquer the world in the 1400s, but for the last 500 years they've essentially shut the door and didn't welcome anybody in. The Brits and the Americans forced their way in, followed by the Japanese, followed by the European powers and the Germans and things like that, and they really basically opened China up. Britain in particular was very guilty of getting China addicted to heroin and opium. And the whole Boxer Rebellion period was around China saying, no, you can't turn our country into a country of drug addicts. You know, for Britain it was just a legitimate export. For China it was destroying their soul. Britain and the US forced Japan open, who, I don't know if anyone knows much about the history of Japan, but they are one of the most adaptive countries in the world. In the last 100 years or so, they've reinvented themselves twice. They were a closed kingdom in the 1880s. America and Britain opened them up, and Japan said, well, we're going to be like Britain, we're just going to invade China, and Korea, and Russia. And they were really good at it. And the Chinese and the Japanese hated each other for that. Japan did invade these areas, just copying the imperialist model. Now, I believe what China's doing right now is copying the imperialist model, but they're doing it economically. A bit of subterfuge. China is, to be honest, quite legitimately sick of being treated like the weakling of Asia, because they're not. But that's how they've been treated, and if you don't think they have a chip on their shoulder, you're wrong. They do. Right? And it's not without reason. After World War II, Mao Zedong had the Great Leap Forward, where they realised they need to bring China out into the world. The Communist Revolution didn't work very well. One of the things that I didn't know until Ryan pointed out the other day, more than 20 million people in China lost their life in World War II at the hands principally of the Japanese. Well, that's a big number. And then along came Tiananmen Square, and the Communist Party of China realised they needed to do something different.
Yeah, what a lot of people realise is that that's actually the third highest casualty rate out of any country in World War II. So, all right, so they're opening up. They've got a reputation of doing it quite aggressively. What's been happening over the last couple of decades here?
So, in opening up, in making a decision to engage the rest of the world post Tiananmen Square, it was about this place to start with. They're opening salvo in the world. Does anyone know where that is? It's not Hawaii. It's the Paracel Islands in the South China Sea. So it's in this part of China. Just up here, sorry, this part, it's just up here. Why is this area significant, folks? No, it's a little bit more than that, Chris. Yep. This area from here, down through there, through the Straits of Malacca, underneath Malaysia and past Singapore, the single most important trade route in the world. China exports a whole bunch of stuff to Europe that way. Japan exports a whole bunch of stuff. A lot of the Australian resources come up through there. The single most important trade route in the world. Under the old principle of possession is 90% of the law. China wants to own the most important trade route in the world, and then everyone has to play nice with China. So it's an area of great contest right now. I think we're all aware of this. This little country here called Vietnam hates them. Philippines, not fond of them either. Indonesia, not fond of Chinese because it's quite a tense relationship. Taiwan, we all know about Taiwan, they want to be independent. The rest of China has demanded that Taiwan not get international recognition. The rest of the world kind of recognises them quietly on the side. It's a subject of great dispute. So the economic initiative, and you may have heard of this when there's been a bit of attack on Victoria lately, China has attempted, and I'm sorry the resolution here isn't very good, but China has lent an awful lot of money to the rest of the world. Why? Because your banker controls your priorities. It's as simple as that. Now they know that a lot of these countries are going into economic difficulty, and so they're going to have favoured trading nation status. They're going to do a lot of things to permit China to extend its influence and develop its economic ties with the rest of the world. It's hard to tell here, but there's a whole big country missing here because it's not coming up. Australia. There's another country missing here, Japan. There's another country missing here, India. And there's another one over here somewhere. I don't know if you've heard of it. Is it over here? Oh, over here. United States of America and Canada. They're really important nations. You'll look at them again in a second. So China's attempting to get an economic tie to the rest of the world. So the imperialist model that Japan and America and the US and the European countries used 100 years ago, where it was all about resources. The country that controls the world's resources controls the world. So that's why the UK invaded everybody. That's why the Americans, with a slightly different model, tried to trade with everybody. In this instance, I think the Americans and the Brits are really good at dropping very accurate bombs. So China doesn't want to take the nation away, and that's relevant for Australia because we're a vulnerable nation. They don't want to own the land, they just want to own them economically, if that makes sense. So the resources, the economic growth and the trading stacks, not necessarily the stuff they dig out of the ground.
So that's what they're doing, and yes, they're doing quite effectively, as you can see. They're doing deals with a lot of the world, a few important countries there. Isn't that just all part of the economic rough and tumble though? Why is so much tension? Why is there so much hostility and tension between the Western nations and China if they're just trying to expand and have a bit of a go?
Oh, principally because America doesn't want to give up their status. Russia doesn't want to give up their status. The UK and Europe doesn't want to give up their status. If we look historically, those are the nations that have controlled capitalism around the world, and that's where the goal is. Let's not kid ourselves. You don't need to own a country now to gain financial benefit from it. And one of the great benefits of globalisation and trade is quite simply it stops war. Right? China will not invade Australia for two reasons. One, hardest country in the world to invade. You can take the top bit, but the minute you try to go south, they're just going to bomb you very accurately. So you can't invade nations very easily. But these countries that were in charge, all the European countries, the Americans, the Russians, they don't want to give up their status. Now, China has not been a great corporate citizen. We know what they're doing, right? Does anyone know Alibaba? Biggest trading platform in the world. Makes eBay look tiny. They know what's going on with all domestic trade and all through Asia and increasingly in Europe and America. Huawei were the largest telecommunications, state-owned companies obviously, or state has interest in them. They tried to control the telecommunication network and the data networks in America and Europe and Australia, and the government said no. There's a company called Baidu, again, convicted of the same thing, doing a lot of AI data, a lot of AI work. AI, China actually, I don't know if you know this, leads the world in artificial intelligence. So this, when you pick up the phone and recognise the face, a lot of that's Chinese technology. So they are, if they control the telecommunication networks, they know who's going where and when and by what volumes and all that sort of stuff. So it's a little bit scary. There's a company called WeChat in China, which it's quite funny. I was in Hong Kong a year or so back, and I needed to get to the airport. I went to pay the guy with a credit card, and he looked at me like I was an idiot because he didn't take credit cards. And he said, WeChat, and I went, no WeChat. And I had to give him about $20 Hong Kong, whatever it was, in cash, and he was annoyed because he wanted to be paid via WeChat, which is apparently if you are on a roadside stall somewhere in the middle of the mountains in China, they want to be paid with WeChat. It's scary. And I think you've all seen that there's social scores. A lot of the Chinese people via WeChat, they're being measured as to whether they're good citizens or not. They're keeping data on everything and everybody, and the AI engines are really driving it. TikTok's another one. Anyone have any grandchildren? Daughters? I don't know what TikTok is, but they're on every child's phone in the world. And there's a lot of pressure coming from the Western nations to stop these companies gathering data and selling it back to or giving it back to the Chinese government, which is what's happening.
Well, Trump for all his antics, he actually did try to hold him accountable for this data, didn't he? He did step up and face China head on.
He did. There's a lot of stories we could tell here, but this is an interesting extract. I deliberately went for something that wasn't an American newspaper, an Australian newspaper. I went to Al Jazeera. So this is commentary on Obama, who, for all his grace and manners, and the guy could wear a suit and dance, let's be honest, he was a beautiful statesman in that sense. He's actually been held up now as a very weak president when it comes to the threat from China. And the words here are not, there's many places to find this, haplessly clung to the delusion that China would play nice. Obama repeatedly failed to protect its allies in the Asia Pacific region. Now that's, we are one of the allies. Did not do anything to back Australia up, and that's important in the context of things that Biden said. There's now bipartisan consensus, and I'm not even going to talk to Trump. Can we just all accept that he's an idiot and a very graceless idiot? Right. The point is, everything he said when it came to China was done with 100% support from both houses of Parliament in America. There's no controversy there at all. There's been virtually no controversy in Australia. A little bit, not much. So it's quite a strong, Trump was speaking for America genuinely when he put pressure on China. And every time China responded with more threats and bullying, and then quietly went back to the negotiating table afterwards. The Chinese are a trading nation, don't kid yourself. They haven't got the capability of invading anything. They are a trading nation that wants to have economic ties to the people that provide them with resources, which is us, and the people that they sell stuff to.
They mightn't have been overly clear or it mightn't have stood out, but yeah, there is bipartisan consensus that getting tough on China was the right thing to do. With the Biden administration coming in, we didn't know what we were going to get, but they have held a tough line on China.
They have. Biden's definitely pro-climate change, pro this, pro that, but he's not pro-China. So there's a couple of things. The Biden very quickly, for example, this was his new Secretary of State. Trump was right in taking tough, I mean, that didn't make any media. No one wants any story that Biden supports Trump's decisions or anything. Biden came out very quickly and almost within a week of coming into power, sent warships into the South China Sea. That's literally like moving into someone's backyard and setting up camp. So Biden was very strong, and that was a very quick early signal from America that this wasn't changing. So that's good. Good to see that the Biden presidency is holding that tight line. But what about Australia and China? Our relationship seems particularly icy right now. What's the story there, and what does it mean? For some reason, I'm not able to go forward. Oh, what's the next? Heard of the Five Eyes Network? No, I don't know if that came from the videos we're shooting. But the Five Eyes Network, basically Britain, America, Australia, Canada and New Zealand. Mainly because there is intelligence sharing across all the nations, but most European nations leak like a sieve. What actually happened was these countries started to realise what China was doing, and one country in particular said, no, we must stop this, and we're going to get that big fat bully called America, and we're going to get them to stand up to it. And they stirred the pot, and they actually created the tension that exists between China and the Western world. And you know who that was? It was Australia. Right? Let's call it the echoes of Gallipoli or something like that. They actually said no. With the exception of the occasional Australian politician and potentially the state of Victoria, we stood up to America and to China. And China is pissed off at us because we called them out on what they were doing. Now we did that deliberately, and I'm not going to get into it in politics. Started with Malcolm Turnbull, and it was the right thing to do. Right? But we are paying a little bit of a price for that now in terms of what's going on in the media. We're going to get onto the price in terms of what's going on with our exports in a second, but Australia picked that fight deliberately.
Yep, go ahead.
I mentioned there was another organisation that contained India, Japan, Australia and America. It's called Quad. Have you heard of that? Okay. Basically a military alliance. It's really interesting though. I don't know if you're aware of it, but India and Australia, not so much with the nice. They actually don't like each other that much. The Indians have a very fairly poor trading relationship with China, with Australia, which is really interesting given how much they need food imports, how many people they have there. But becoming united against China is a far more greater priority for India. They've realised now that their economic growth, because they are the second most economically amazing nation in the world over the last 25 years. It's just the China story gets a lot of press. So India has now patched its relationship up with Australia, which represents a lot of very positive opportunities for Australia over the next 10 or 20 years, assuming that China and Australia won't patch up, which I think they will.
So it wasn't just pushing on the COVID question. They're angry at us for quite a few reasons there, a lot of tension. Is it going to hurt us economically? What's going to happen? What does that mean for Australia and our economy?
Well, certainly China would have us believe that they can really hurt us. But let's look at some history. Let's figure out what actually happened. Now, I'm sorry the graphs are not very clear on this thing. This is the iron ore price. Basically, the whole of Western Australia thinks they can secede from the Commonwealth because of what's going on with iron ore. But the minute China threatened Australia, the iron ore price took off. Why? Because 56% of everything China exports is steel in it, somewhere in it. Cars, computers, beds, everything's in it. 62% of all the iron ore that China imports comes from Australia. 24% of their imports come from Brazil. Brazil's stuffed. Brazil's in a mess right now because of COVID and a series of other things. So we are the most reliable exporting nation in the world. We're close. We're unaffected by COVID, and that's why the iron ore price took off, which is why Western Australia is seriously, there's political parties over there want us to see from the Commonwealth. If we look at beef prices, the other thing they threatened, same deal. From about April, when they started threatening us, beef price took off. We can go back several years and the price goes up or down, but it's not correlated to seasons or anything, it's actually based on the market. If you look at barley, another thing, remember they made a big to do about barley a while back? Bingo, China threatens Australia, barley. It's almost like, yes please, threaten us. If we look at wheat prices, another one of our key exports, same deal, from April last year. We look at natural gas, another one of our key exports to Asia, same deal. Now this is possibly not just because China's full of hot air, it's probably because we are one of the least affected nations from COVID in the world. Yep, 3 minutes. Coal price, a big one here locally, same deal. Now I put that in for several years there so you can see the coal price is not cyclical to do with northern hemisphere winters or anything. It's the same deal. It went down and then it took off.
So we might hear a lot of tough words from China out there in the media, but at the end of the day, they really do need us.
I think so, yeah. It's a question of who is the most dependent on whom. Right? Remember, China has 1.2 billion people, and they want their government to run the show properly. So if you look here, this is a couple of exports, a couple of extracts I got from the web. Beijing's blockade of Australian coal has caused a dozen cities to ration their electricity use. Southern China's Hunan province was awash with reports in social media of workers climbing dozens of flights of stairs after the lifts were shut down. They pushed all their people into the city and now they've turned the lights off because they're busy kicking the crap out of us. Right? This stuff only lasts a little while before the country comes back to the table and talks to us about, okay, how can we get on better? Here's another one. Southern China's Guangzhou, Hunan, Jiangxi, and how do you pronounce that right? Zhejiang? Right? 3 major economies, and they've got rolling brownouts. So they haven't got enough electricity to keep their cities going. How long do you think a ruling politician can stay in power when people can't have hot water or run the lifts? I'm not 100% sure who needs who more, but they don't have an alternative to Australia at the moment. We produce the best energy, the best coal, the best iron ore, the best food in the most reliable way of any nation in the world. You've heard me say it over and over again. We may live in a challenging world, but we live in the best country in the world, and we live in the best state in the best country. And hell, I think we live in the best region of the best state of the best country. I could not be happier to be raising my children in this place at this time. I really mean it. It's an amazing future for our kids and our grandkids. But the future of this world lies in Asia, India and Africa. The future of this world. And we are the best at doing what we do by a country mile. So to me, the future of this nation, the future of the share market, the future of our companies and the future of your portfolios. And I mean it. You know, I put money in the share market this year. Many of you have. I actually am really positive about this, and I'm glad to hear Belinda at the front end with her banky reticence and all the things that they have to say, and they have to say, oh, I think it might be a 6% rate. I know, this is going to be more than 6%. I might be wrong, you know that, but probably not. This is I don't mean that I'm not, I mean that all, if you can't print as much money as they've printed and not have it go somewhere. It goes into the share market, it goes into the property market, it goes into companies. When companies can make a 10 or a 20 or a 30% return by investing in a new business, exporting to China or Southeast Asia or to India, and it only costs them 2% to borrow the money, that's going to work. It does work. Not everyone's going to go in the share market. They're going to go and buy investment properties because people feel safer doing that. So this is why I made the question early on about whether your grandchildren should get into the market. And I think the answer is yes. It's going to be more expensive. I think it's going to be 30% more expensive in 3 or 4 years' time. So the kids are going to need to be buying houses in Maitland and Rutherford and areas like that. Katie's telling me I'm over time.
No, surely we're on time. Because I saw 1 minute ago. This is the first time we've made this 15-minute presentation in the last 45 minutes. We've done well.
So this is the team. I know so many of you know us fairly well. For those of you that maybe this is the first time you've been into one of these. A lot of great advisors, a lot of great support staff. The truth is we work for them. Be nice to the Katies and the Courtneys and the Oldies of the world, because they're really in charge, not us. It's been a privilege. Thank you very much for your time today. Is there anything anyone want to ask? Any question? Okay, thank you very much. Safe trip home. I think the weather will be easing off.